The valets at the Sterling had seen everything in their 15 years of operation, but the sight of a woman sobbing against a silver Bentley in the executive parking garage was unusual enough to warrant a discreet call to security. Marcus Whitmore, however, intercepted that call before it reached anyone else. He'd been heading toward that very Bentley, his mind still churning through the acquisition papers he'd just signed, when he spotted her, a figure hunched against his driver's side door, her shoulders shaking with the kind of tears that came from somewhere deep and broken. He should have been irritated. Marcus Whitmore didn't do complications, and a stranger using his $60,000 vehicle as a crying post certainly qualified as one. Yet something about the way she held herself, the desperate quietness of her grief, made him pause. She wore a simple black dress that had seen better days, and her dark hair had fallen loose from what must have been a careful updo. In her hand, she clutched a phone like it was both her lifeline and her executioner. "Excuse me," Marcus said, his voice softer than he'd intended. "That's my car." The woman's head snapped up, and Marcus found himself looking into the reddest, most devastated pair of hazel eyes he'd ever seen. She was younger than he'd first thought, maybe early 30s, with the kind of face that would have been striking if it weren't currently blotchy and swollen from crying. Recognition flashed across her features, not of him personally, but of what his presence meant. She was trespassing, and she knew it. "Oh God, I'm so sorry," she stammered, pushing herself away from the Bentley as if it had burned her. She swiped frantically at her face, smearing mascara across her cheeks. I didn't mean to. I just needed a minute, and this level was empty, and I thought—" Her voice broke again, and fresh tears spilled down her face despite her obvious efforts to contain them. Marcus had been about to dismiss her with a nod and continue on his way. He had a reservation at Michelin-starred Chez Laurent in 40 minutes, a blind date his sister had orchestrated with some museum curator who supposedly shared his appreciation for Impressionist art. It was the last thing he wanted to do after a 14-hour workday, but Caroline had been persistent, and he'd finally relented just to stop her meddling in his personal life. But this woman looked so utterly shattered that even his well-practiced emotional detachment wavered. "What happened?" he heard himself ask. She let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "Everything, nothing. I don't even know anymore." She looked down at her phone again, and her face crumpled. "I'm sorry, you don't need to hear this. I'll go." "Wait." Marcus surprised himself again. "Are you hurt? Do you need me to call someone?" "No, She took a shaky breath. "I'm not hurt. Not physically, anyway. Another breath, deeper this time. I got stood up, which is humiliating enough, but I also just realized I can't afford the parking fee because I spent my last $40 on this stupid dress at a thrift store, and my babysitter charges by the hour, and my daughter—" Her voice hitched. "My daughter has been looking forward to me going on this date all week because she thinks if Mommy meets someone nice, maybe we won't have to move again, and I don't know how to tell her that nice men don't actually exist, at least not for women like me." The words tumbled out in a rush, and Marcus could see the moment she realized she'd just unloaded her entire personal crisis onto a complete stranger in a parking garage. Her eyes widened with mortification. "I cannot believe I just said all of that to you," she whispered. "Please forget everything you just heard. I'm going to go die of embarrassment now." But Marcus's analytical mind had already catalogued several important details. Single mother, financial stress, stood up on what was clearly an important date. And something about the way she'd mentioned her daughter, the catch in her voice, the fierce protective love underneath the desperation, had struck something in him he'd thought long dormant. "What's your daughter's name?" he found himself asking. The question clearly caught her off guard. "What? Your daughter? You said she's been excited about tonight. What's her name?" "Grace." The woman's expression softened immediately, the way parents' faces always did when talking about their children. "She's 7. She's with my neighbor right now, probably watching way too much television and eating cereal for dinner, because that's all I had time to leave for them." Fresh tears threatened. "She deserves so much better than this." Marcus made a decision that would have surprised anyone who knew him. Marcus Whitmore was methodical, calculated, and never impulsive. His business success stemmed from his ability to think 3 moves ahead and never let emotion cloud his judgment. Yet here he was, about to throw his entire evening off course for a crying stranger in a parking garage. "Here's what's going to happen," he said, pulling out his wallet. "I'm going to pay your parking fee, and I'm going to call you a car to take you home to Grace. No arguments," he added when she opened her mouth to protest. "Consider it an apology for the male species being generally terrible." "I can't accept that," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "You don't even know me. I could be a con artist who makes up sob stories in parking garages." "Are you?" "No, but—" "Then we're settled." Marcus pulled out several bills and pressed them into her hand before she could refuse. "The parking fee and the car service, and extra for your babysitter, since you're running late." She stared at the money in her hand like it was something foreign. When she looked up at him again, her eyes were swimming with a different kind of tears. "Why are you doing this?" It was a fair question, and Marcus didn't have a good answer. Or rather, he had too many answers, none of which he wanted to examine too closely. Something about her reminded him of his mother, of the years after his father died when she'd worked 3 jobs and still came up short. Something about her fierce love for her daughter resonated with the part of him that still remembered being a scared kid who'd promised himself he'd never let anyone he loved struggle like that again. "Let's call it paying forward some kindness I once received," he said instead. She clutched the bills and he could see her pride warring with her practicality. Practicality won. "Thank you," she whispered. "You have no idea what this means. I'm Victoria, by the way." "Victoria Chen, no, that's—" She caught herself looking flustered. "I mean Victoria Russell. I kept my married name for Grace's sake, even though—" She stopped herself again. "I'm sorry. You don't need my life story." "Victoria Russell," Marcus repeated, and the name felt significant somehow, though he couldn't say why. He extended his hand. Marcus Whitmore. Her hand was small in his, and he noticed the calluses on her palms, the hands of someone who worked hard for everything she had. When she realized whose hand she was shaking, her eyes widened. Wait, Marcus Whitmore as in Whitmore Enterprises? As in the Marcus Whitmore who just bought the Henderson building downtown? Guilty. Oh my God. She looked down at the money in her hand, then back at him. "This is too weird. I can't take this. You're you, and I'm someone who needs help getting home to her daughter," Marcus finished. "That's all that matters right now." Victoria looked like she wanted to argue, but exhaustion won out. "Okay," she said softly. "Okay, thank you, really." She hesitated, then added, "I hope your evening goes better than mine did." Marcus thought about his impending blind date, about the predictable conversation he'd have with a woman he'd never see again, about the emptiness of his penthouse apartment waiting for him afterward. "I'm sure it will be exactly what I expect," he said, which wasn't really an answer at all. As he watched Victoria walk toward the elevator, something made him call out, "Victoria!" She turned back. "The man who stood you up tonight? He's an idiot." A genuine smile broke through her tears for the first time, transforming her face. "That's kind of you to say." After she disappeared into the elevator, Marcus stood alone in the parking garage, his phone buzzing with a text from his sister. "Don't you dare bail on this date. Jennifer is perfect for you. Successful, cultured, beautiful. Give her a chance." Marcus looked at the text, then at the elevator doors where Victoria had vanished. He thought about genuine smiles and hard-working hands, and the fierce love in a mother's voice when she said her daughter's name. Then he thought about another perfectly pleasant evening with another perfectly suitable woman who would leave him feeling perfectly empty. He typed back. Something came up. Rescheduling. Caroline's response was immediate and predictable. "Marcus, you promised." But Marcus was already walking back toward the elevator, an idea forming in his mind that was either brilliant or completely insane. He'd built a billion-dollar empire on his instincts, and right now every instinct he had was telling him that the woman who'd been crying against his car was about to become very important to his life. He just had to figure out how to see her again without seeming like a stalker or a savior complex case, which, he reflected as the elevator carried him back up to his office, was a problem that all his business acumen hadn't prepared him to solve. Victoria Russell stood in the doorway of her tiny apartment, watching her daughter sleep. Grace's small chest rose and fell with the peaceful rhythm of childhood dreams, her favorite stuffed rabbit clutched tight against her heart. The unicorn nightlight cast soft purple shadows across her face, making her look even younger than 7. Victoria felt the familiar ache of loving someone so much it physically hurt. "She fell asleep about 20 minutes ago," whispered Mrs. Patterson. The elderly neighbour who babysat whenever Victoria could afford it. Kept asking when you'd be home. Said she wanted to hear all about your Prince Charming. Victoria's throat tightened. There was no Prince Charming, Mrs. Patterson. Just another frog. The older woman's expression softened with sympathy. Oh, honey, I'm sorry. Don't be, I'm used to it. Victoria handed her the money Marcus had given her, keeping only what she needed for groceries. Mrs. Patterson tried to refuse the generous amount, but Victoria insisted. The woman survived on Social Security and deserved every penny after Mrs. Patterson left. Victoria collapsed onto her second-hand couch and finally let herself think about what had happened in that parking garage. Marcus Whitmore. The Marcus Whitmore. She'd seen his picture